GBA has been addressing issues related to open NET.PEN aquaculture operations in Georgian Bay and the North Channel for over 20 years now. And most of our aquaculture committee are actually here today. So if you could raise your hand when I call your name. Claudette Young, South Channel Association, who has worked tirelessly for 18 years on this committee and has been the chair for the last 12. Paul Hamblin, who has a place in the Sans Souci and Copperhead area, our chief scientist on the file for the last 20 years. Bill Stice, McGregor Bay, who is chair of our fisheries committee and dealing with our relationships with the industry. Jerry Quinn, also McGregor Bay, who was a long-standing GBA director and remained on this committee after Bill took over from him as director. Jerry is currently dealing with our aquaculture media relations. And last but not least, Jim Bolton, who has also provided scientific expertise for the last 19 years and will be describing GBA's position on this matter in his presentation shortly. It astonishes me how long this magnificent team has been working on the file and the enormous amount of volunteer time and effort that they have all made over so many years and continue to make. I think we should give them a round of applause. I would like to make it clear that GBA recognises the vital importance of a healthy and vibrant global aquaculture industry to counter the exploitation of rapidly declining wild fish stocks all over the world. However, we believe that this industry must only grow fish in a completely sustainable fashion that minimises any harm to the environment. In our opinion, open NET.PEN aquaculture operations in Georgian Bay and the North Channel do not meet this criteria, which is why we have been seeking to persuade the industry and the government to cease the practice and have these operations moved into closed containment systems or onto land. We regularly make submissions to government to demonstrate the impact that this industry is having, such as nutrient loading, where an aquaculture operation in nearshore waters can tip the balance in these nutrient-rich environments so that blue-green algae forms, as is happening right now, every year, in fact for the last 4 consecutive years and on 5 previous occasions at Lake Wolseley, an embayment off the North Channel. Pointing out to the Ontario government the inconsistency between allowing this industry to operate and the water quality provisions and commitments they have made under the Great Lakes Protection Act. Similar commitments by the federal government have been made under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and the Federal Ministry of Fisheries and Oceans is the ultimate authority in Canada on water-based aquaculture. GBA's position is that by allowing this industry to disperse fish excrement, uneaten food, antibiotics and other medications, and escapees into public waters, government is not complying with the intentions of either of these agreements. The US states bordering the Great Lakes agree. They have consistently rejected requests to open up their waters to open NET.PEN operations because their assessment of the associated risks is that they significantly outweigh the minimal economic benefits. License renewals. We believe that no expansion of this industry should occur and no new licenses should be issued until such time as the full impact of the operations on the aquatic environment is known. GBF's recent research has shown clearly that there are still many unanswered questions, which we will now examine.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'd like to start off by introducing the Georgian Bay Aquaculture Association Committee. The committee is made up of marine biologists, microbiologists, limnologists, environmental engineers, businessmen, finance people, a fairly wide spectrum of scientific people, all with one sort of concern, and the question is it appropriate to do NET.PEN aquaculture in Georgian Bay? So I've been sort of volunteering my input from time to time for the last 20 years as the environmental engineer. As an environmental engineer, I'm going to provide a high-level systems view of what's going on. And I'd like to start off first off, why do I care about this? I grew up on a cottage in Buckburn Lake. In the 1970s, I spent my entire day swimming. There were 3 rocks. There was lots of fish to catch. There's big frogs. The weeds were kind of way out past the rocks. My aunts and uncles who moved there in the 50s, they talked about there being huge turtles and great big tires in the water that were snakes that would slither away. I never saw the big turtles, I never saw the big snakes, but I did see frogs, lots of fish, lots of great swimming. By about the 80s, that started to change, and that actually really stressed me. Couldn't catch any fish, I didn't see any frogs, the weeds came in. In the 90s, the zebra mussels came and coated those rocks. You couldn't swim up to the rocks because they were like little razor blades. I saw firsthand the devastation of human impact on a freshwater body at Buckburn Lake. That actually, contrasting that with my time as a junior ranger at Killarney Park when I was 17, I was exposed to an environment that had less of an impact from human activity. And those contrasts between what humans can do to an environment and what an environment does when it's left untouched was so stark to me that I decided to become an environmental engineer, and it had a big impact on my life. While I was up there working and going to school, University of Guelph as an environmental engineer, I decided, you know what, I would love to stay living here and find a job. And at the time I was exposed to the Blue Creek Fish Hatchery, M&R operated facility in Manitoulin Island. I really fell in love with growing fish, and of course the cod hatcheries had collapsed on the East Coast, and Pacific fisheries was under a lot of stress in the West Coast, and we got to grow fish. This is the way to do it. And I'm 100% supportive of the concept of engineering systems to grow a great quality protein. At the same time, while I was looking at maybe getting, as an entrepreneur, wanting to start a fish farm in Georgian Bay, there was an example in Lacrosse Channel where the system started to look a little shaky. It might actually be having a fairly severe impact on the body of water. So I went and looked into it, and this is the top right corner, that's in Idaho. They grow a lot of trout there. They use NET.PEN aquaculture. So I went out there in '99 and realized that in fact, even that sort of, on-land approach is also having a fairly significant impact on the environment. And then as an engineer and a systems guy, I then went off and worked on recirculating aquaculture, hoping that that might be able to solve the problem. This was my experience in Idaho. So it's a big trout industry, raceways. I don't know if you can see it, but what I noticed is that the effluent from these raceways left very noticeable streams of algae growth. You add phosphorus to an ecosystem, it is going to accelerate the ecosystem. Everything's it's going to be party time. So no doubt, but what I was seeing here in Idaho concerned me. It wasn't quite jibing with what I was hoping aquaculture could be. Why does the Georgian Bay Association care about aquaculture? This is a classic example. This is Lacrosse Channel. There were a bunch of farms put in there. Starting about 1985. One in particular was put in 1989. By about 9 years, there was enough public complaints and an MOE investigation that what had happened is all the kind of excrement from the farm, the manure, the feces, it had accumulated at the bottom of the lake where there's in essence a bowl of cold water that doesn't exchange with the rest of the lake. And that bowl, there's so much phosphorus and organic matter, oxygen couldn't survive in that bowl. And also there's some concerns of phosphorus leaching up and causing algae. So the operations was abandoned. In 2005, that was a picture taken by the environmental commissioner, Gord Miller. In that report in 2006, I think, he expressed concerns about aquaculture. But this is sort of a case study that, if done improperly, aquaculture can have severe ecosystem-wide impact. Right after that, there was another one in Quebec called the HENEY Lake, Lac HENEY. In this case, the Quebec government actually sort of permitted and allowed a fish farm to be put in this relatively small enclosed lake. It was about 350 cottagers. That was in '94. Very quickly after, the cottagers noticed more algae, less palpable, swimming, drinking, all kinds of concerns. So they actually brought in their own scientists because the government wasn't responding to their concerns. They were quite intent on just making the industry happen and growing the fish. The scientists deemed that, in fact, the fish farm was, in fact, causing lake-wide destruction to the water body. Eventually, the facility stopped in 1999, but a class action lawsuit was brought against Quebec, and that was settled in 2004. What's interesting about that is that the cottagers were given $4.1 million to fix this ecological disaster, and the fish farmer was given $2 million because they had to yank the license away. So the province was on the hook for $6.2 million. I think it was a 250 ton per year facility, 5 years operational, farm gate value of $2 a pound. I calculated the farm gate value of that farm would have been $5.5 million, minus all the costs to operate it. And then add to that the cost that the Quebec government had to do to fix the situation. I believe after that check, the Quebec government didn't permit freshwater NET.PEN aquaculture. So Neil presented this. This is exactly the source of the problem. We can model this thing, and you have food and fish in, you have fish out, and you have excrement and all the other stuff that stays in the system. The concern that we have are those question marks. You have a large pile of manure. You could take away the fish and put a dock with a bunch of pigs up there and just scrape all the manure off the dock and let it settle to the bottom of the water column. It's in essence the same system. It's just the cultivated species above the water than below the water. So there's a lot of questions as to like what happens with all that excrement. So I'm just going to quickly highlight, give you a quick primer on environmental engineering systems approach. We all know the water cycle. There's other matter cycles. There's the carbon cycle, which we participate in every time we eat something and breathe. Every time you see a fire, it's the carbon cycle. There's a gaseous way for carbon to get back up into the atmosphere. There's also a lesser known nitrogen cycle, where there's a gaseous way for nitrogen, which makes up the largest percentage of the atmosphere. The phosphorus cycle, does anyone notice something missing in the phosphorus cycle? There's no gaseous route for the phosphorus to leave the water. The only way it can really leave is if it gets taken up in biomatter, or this very slow sedimentation back into the rocks and out through volcanoes. A couple interesting things about phosphorus. We currently mine it to provide it for our food supply. Some experts say we have about 25 to 30 years left. Here's another environmental concern for everyone. 25 to 30 years left to mine phosphorus, and then we're out. And how are we going to feed the world then? The ocean ultimately becomes the sink for all of our phosphorus. It becomes very dilute. So the fact that once phosphorus gets into an aquatic ecosystem, and we don't know what actually happens to it, we don't know. Anyways, just wanted to quickly show the long-term effects of phosphorus. It's an algae bloom in Lake Erie, a small one and a major one. Of course, Commissioner Walker talked about Toledo having had the water supply not just don't drink, but don't touch the water for 3 days. Our greatest concerns, and I'm closing, our greatest concerns as a committee is number one, the questionable application of the precautionary principle when it comes to NET.PEN freshwater aquaculture. We feel that there's an assumption that this is what we got to do, and we feel that there isn't necessarily the appropriate consultation with the communities that are affected by it. We get lost in all of the science, and so we rush forward on this concept that has evidently dire consequences to our ecosystems. The Office of the Auditor General published a report this year about salmon, expressing that they think the government's not taking into consideration the risks. Similar things have been mentioned by the Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, Gordon Miller. So we feel there's this rush to do it without the question, should we be doing it? Another example of this, and this is neat, aquaculture was originally licensed under a sewage permit. Someone at MOE said, well, there's no sewage pipes. So then went over to the MNR, it's a land use permit, justifying that they're gonna deposit all the feces on the bottom of the shore. Of course, everything, you can't do one thing in one section of the lake without affecting the whole lake. So now the question is who should manage it, who should permit it? But currently it's considered a class environmental assessment. So it's considered to have the exact same amount of risk as building an Ontario Ranger camp. And so the predictable environmental effects can be readily managed. We take exception to that statement. Another problem is that the unprecedented ownership rights. So the farmers want to have the lake bottom to put their wastes, the water column to dilute their wastes, and the surface to grow their farms. And they want to prevent people from going in there And owning the piece of water column is unprecedented. And that's something that I think we need to be discussed. There's also the subsidized economic model of it. Free water, free wastewater disposal, free space. We're really subsidizing something. And if the system falls apart, who's going to pay for the fix? So perhaps fish farms should start buying bonds to perhaps fix the inevitable mistake. And then, of course, the genetic disease chemical contamination, that's covered on the coast really well. But that was the basis of the Auditor General's concern. The other thing is that our neighbors don't do it. The Michigan did a great job. They pulled together an independent panel of experts. They had a bunch of public consultations. They had thousands of written submittals from citizens against the concept of NET.PEN. They had a couple hundred for. They decided to ban it. So it's not allowed in Michigan. Washington is phasing out NET.PEN. They're putting pressure on BC to do the same. So our committee, we basically said aquaculture is a good thing if it's done properly. We think it needs to be in a controlled system, and the users and the business owners need to own the pollution and the fix and fully account for it. So thank you for listening to our concerns.